Welcome to Steaming It Up Anywhere. I'm Kristen Brennison from NIU STEAM, and joining me today is Mike Jones from Thomas Metcalf Middle School. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
How are you today?
Surviving the pandemic, so we're all huddled in, nice and safe. I'm in my little basement. I'm being left alone, so this is my there's version of heaven, I think. So
Little me time.
it is. So
So, Mike, can you tell us a little bit about what you do at Thomas Metcalf and what you teach? And
sure. So Thomas Metcalf, we're a lab school. A lab school is a dying breed here. We're underneath the College of Ed at Illinois State University. We're a public school. We're not a private or a charter, but instead of a school board, we're under College of Ed. So with that, one of our main charters is working with college students before they student teach. So with the before, like in the first internships, they plan lessons, they observe us, we have a lot of discussions. It's a really fun area to work at, and it gives me a lot of freedom in my approach. Also with it, I get to teach some night classes. So I'm teaching middle school science methods class, and I also teach an elementary science methods class as well. So part of the day it's working with little kids, part of the day it's working with big kids, and there's not much difference
I was
sometimes,
to
but
say, that's all the same, right?
yeah, it is. So just bigger frames. So
So, when you're teaching, what do you teach at the middle school?
I teach seventh, eighth grade science. So we're a small school. Before this, I was at Bloomington Public School, junior high, and we were about probably 13, 1,400 students in sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. Down to my building now where I'm 400 students pre-K to eighth grade. So
Wow.
about 50 per grade. It's a really small number. It's fantastic because I see all seventh graders and I also see all eighth graders, which means I get them for 2 years back to back. And I love the looping approach. And also just being such a small school, getting to know families. So seeing siblings, different generations, and having that trust and that relationship already built saves you a lot of time. So it's kind of fun. Day one with eighth grade, that nice warm fuzzies. We can do a little bit of that, but hey, let's get right to learning because we already know each other. You know me, I know you. Let's cut from this.
Let's do this.
Let's get to some learning here. So it's really empowering for a lot of ways.
So, what are some of the ways that you kind of promote that STEAM learning with your students in your class, right? Like either right now or when you are in the class with them?
Yeah. What I love about even just when the NGSS came around was how much more emphasis there was for science to have the engineering. Before that, we always knew it was good and we always thought we should try to incorporate as much in science as we could. But we really didn't have the standards to rely upon saying this is our direction we should go, talking to management and saying like these are the reasons why we need to do all the STEMs. So it's almost like a shield that NGSS gave us to be better teachers and embrace the STEM movement in our classrooms. So for us, it's easy for almost any unit to bring in those STEM standards. When I work with my student teachers and my interns too, the first thing I try to have them do is have a really good understanding of the standards and what they mean. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull up my website with some of the STEM standards here. And let me share screen and share. And are you seeing my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, I got a little pop-up here. We're gonna have to take a pause. So
This is the joys of technology, right?
yeah, and oh, I'm afraid this button might do bad things. Let's see. It's good. I can't do a screen share now. So
Let's see.
can you do a screen share?
I, oh, the host has disabled participant sharing. Let me see what happens when I reclaim host. This will be part where Kim will do some editing.
Hi, Kim. I really want to say thank you for your time and help on this. So we've been just talking about how much we like Kim, and thank you.
Let's see. See if you can share. Oh, wait, here we go. All right. Try that now.
Oh, there we go.
Here, wait, is it still recording? And it is still recording.
It's
Excellent.
still recording. Excellent. And do you see me too or just the screen?
I see you too.
Okay, so let me bring up this little toolbar here and let's kind of just go through a few things that I like previously prepared for our lesson in our chat today. So when we look at our STEM standards, the one thing actually my kids we talked about last night, my college students, is the surprise for folks who haven't seen the middle school engineering standards is actually how few deal with kids building and creating. And I think the stereotype before that was kids always have to build and they always have to have hands on and they always have to be creating through STEM. And I'm not saying that's not important. I think it is probably the key and the pinnacle of what we want to shoot for students. But if we look at our STEM standards, only this last one here, that last engineering one, really talks about kids making models. And for me, it was eye opening that looking at the standards, not only did this put this at the end and there's so many other standards, but I thought about the students who struggled with creating and the students who just weren't allowed to be like tinker in the garage, or those that didn't have the experience of going out and like building and creating and exploring, those kids who are deprived of Legos as a child. So for me, those kids usually struggled with these engineering ones because they didn't have the understanding. They didn't understand just physically, like, what is the design cycle like? How do I physically do something? But what you do is if you look at these STEM standards here, there's a lot of prep work that sometimes is like younger me, a lot younger me, used to neglect. And like what are the constraints of the problem? Like, can I really define the problem? And what are some criteria that's going to be successful? How do I define success? And then what are some constraints? What do I need to be limited to? And like these are ones that I just kind of assumed the kids would know. But after starting to actually teach those standards, I found out they didn't. They didn't do it, didn't have a good understanding. And sometimes that led into problems with their builds. There's a lot of almost like fantasy thought of like, oh, I'm going to build this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to weld these two pieces together. Do you know how to weld? No. Well, I'm all about the growth mindset, but let's talk about realism about what we can accomplish here. And also not only just recreating the wheel, but also letting the kids see what else is already out there. Like, how are we solving this problem in real life? So this second one here about evaluating competing designs, that one's a really powerful one for kids to do, not only just in classroom, but that's been a kind of a good default of mine, which I'll get into later on this e-learning. While they may be removed from tools and access to do some of the creating that I want them to do, maybe we're going to start really looking what's out there already. How are people solving problems, and what can we do to make that better? And then we talk about like what does it really mean to analyze tests? What is good data? How do we collect data? And then we really get into the building part here. So when we start looking and have an understanding of the standards, the other big takeaway from NGSS that I bring into this is what's going to be my phenomenon? What's going to kick off my unit? And then after they have this understanding, how can I bring in these STEM standards to help me evaluate where they're at in their learning? So for this, one little hint I often talk about that some teachers don't know about, especially in these middle ones here, is when we start talking about evaluating designs for students, there's something called a decision matrix or a Pugue chart. So basically, when the kids have decided like what does success look like, and then what are the constraints that they're limited to, we turn it into some kind of chart. So what we say is like, this is the way be the first one, like three different things of solutions we could look at. And then how do we really judge those? So one of the standards my students wrestle with is looking at different green energy and which is better, wind or solar. And how do we really know just without a surface level understanding? How do we really break down that problem? So from that, we start talking about production costs. We start talking about output. We talk about different areas where they can start making different categories here. Sometimes you also hear this called as a Pugh chart, P-U-G-H, but it really helps kids to frame their discussion. So if we're doing like those CERs, this right here is going to be either evidence that they're looking at. When I teach this with kids, the first thing I do is like, you want to play baseball, and you go to the garage and you can't find a baseball. You found like a golf ball. What else could you find? A basketball, a tennis ball. Okay, which one to use? Which one will be better? So we talk about like concept one, concept two, concept three. Maybe that's going to be golf ball, tennis ball, and uh, basketball. And what do we do with baseball? Well, we might need to throw it. We might need to catch it. We might need to hit it. So all those will be on the side here. Inside this little chart, there's a lot of ways to do it. Sometimes I've seen simple thumbs up, thumbs down, neutral. I've seen a 1 through 10 scale, which is a little bit more advanced. You wouldn't want to start your kids on that way, but they want to have one kind of judging scale where they can rate an item. Now, another advanced tip is maybe even having a way where we can start weighting categories more too. You're not going to start your kids off there, but we can start them off in baby steps and then work our way up. And yes, this might feel subjective on a lot of this. Like, really, like I gave this a 1, I gave this a 5, and you gave this a 7. But at least we have a area for our kids to be able to frame their conversations.
Well, you could actually dig in a little bit more and create some criteria, couldn't you?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
So we're doing like a measurement thing, like how
Hmm.
many pennies did that bolt actually hold, right? And then another one which kids sometimes struggle with is cost. So like I can build something really great. How much did that cost you? $28, right? So like I'm a teacher in Illinois. We want to keep our money and cost really low on this area too. So there is a
Well,
possibility to get, yeah.
and I know when we do engineering design challenges with kids, we also talk about repeatability.
Yes.
A solution might work one time really well, but is it reliable? Is it repeatable? And that is one of the criterion that you would use to choose the right solution, because
Mhm.
you want something that's going to be reliable or that isn't going to fatigue quickly or break every fifth time.
Love that. Yes. One of the I do it for kids the first time in my 7th grade, we started looking at heat and how heat transferred. And I'll say, like, bring in some cups and we'll categorize them and then we'll see how well they keep something cold, cold for how long. And my kids we usually break it into like 3 different groups, like the paper group, the plastic group, and the metal group. And it's interesting for them to even do that. Like, we'll use different thermometers and measure it throughout the day. But they'll categorize like all metal containers the same, whether it's a $50 Yeti or those fake, well, the Fetties, I call them the fake Yetis or whatever. Like, and not even just like, they won't think of the design, the shape, the quality, the build, the repeat. They'll just look at like the materials only and being it. So when they get, I love anytime they get like data that doesn't make sense to them.
Hmm.
Like, okay, like, and then they used to see them start guessing, like, why doesn't, they're like, did I mess up on this? And unfortunately, sometimes I see this more in my girls where they're a little bit uncertain on their data in the beginning of the year, where they feel like I must have done something wrong because my data doesn't match up to your data. Compared to later on in the year when they start having that confidence, that little swagger in their walk, where they're like, oh, no, no, we don't match up. Let's kind of dig in and see what other properties are different between these different containers.
Yeah, I like that critical thinking around data and questioning, does this data really work? And if it doesn't, why? What's going on?
So with these standards, it's pretty easy to bring them into a lot of different units. And I'll try to do at least 1 9 week, bring these in at least once per 9 week for my science. Some different examples, and one we're actually working with right now is I've got my students, we're studying natural selection, and we got into invasive species. Now, typically in my class, you'll see something along like this. This is a question board where we have that phenomenon to kick us off. So my opening for this unit was like, I showed them a video of the Illinois River and fish jumping out in this boat. Let me tell you, that was a hard find because a lot of vocabulary used when all these fish were hitting people made a little like, okay, middle school, I want to make sure I keep my job. No, don't want
Yep.
to get fired, fire hazard.
We're going to play that one without sound.
Right? And on the EU, you learn it. I'm like, I don't know what they might find like the next video after this.
Yeah.
So with this is, I'm like, what's going on with these fish? So that's kind of like our driving question we were looking around. And then we broke it down to different questions the kids have had. And after the kids have their questions, we kind of figure out like how do they group? Like, okay, one group of questions was how did the fish get here? And then another question is like, well, what are they doing to our river system? And then this other one over here, this big side here is, well, what can we do about it? And if you notice, like you might see the lines coming off of it like a big concept map. Not only are these their questions, but a lot of those are their evidence and answers they found. And that's one of our engineering pieces. So with it, I wanted to evaluate all the different ways that we can handle the Asian carp experience. So from that, kind of our storyline that we did with this is, first let's just talk about how do we know these fish are in the Illinois River and a little bit of background information. I gave them a little game to play. It's called Invasion, and it's 2 types of games. One's you're the fish, which seems kind of odd. The second one is you're up in Chicago and you're trying to stop the fish from getting into the lake, and everything you do kind of has a consequence. So if you spend too much money, you'll have a consequence with that. If you do something that's really bad for the environment, the voters might not vote for you. So it's a neat game to expose students to the different options of what is out there, from fishing to the electrical gates they're using to netting to other biological means. For me, also, it's easy, and I feel like I'm talking a lot about the engineering. It's a good time to get into some of this math here too. So, like, how do we even know how many fish are in the river? How many fish are in the lake? So we talk about sampling and doing other math materials in here. We use a gizmo here from Explore Learning, which I love. There's ways to do this with like paper and fish, but on an online version, the repeatability of this, it just makes it really convenient. I give them quite a few articles to read and about the different options we can do, and from Popular Science, Popular Mechanics, and just to say, like, these are some different choices. What should we look at? What shouldn't we look at? And from that, then I want them to do their own research as well. Like, okay, in the world of fake news, what can you find, and how do I know if it's a good resource? How do I know if it's something you can trust?
So do you find that by starting off with that phenomena and showing them all these fish jumping in the boat,
Mhm.
they're more likely to dig into their readings and the research because they're already curious about
Oh,
it?
absolutely. The key of a phenomenon is to build that curiosity.
Hmm.
And you want a phenomenon where when they see it, you're going to kind of know the questions that the kids are going to ask, and that's going to launch your unit. Also, too, as much as I can bring in local issues, like I could talk about rabbits in Australia for invasive species, or like snakes in Guams, but no, we're talking about Illinois River, just a few miles away from us. What happens here? And then we reference like all those ash trees we're cutting down. Maybe they've seen those, or the Japanese beetles that are like here in the summer. Like, how can we make the science pertinent and important to them? So right now we are looking at in another unit. Um, our water cycle and where does our water come from,
Hmm.
and it's interesting to them too because we had a scare in our area about lead in the water, and we also referenced from Flint, Michigan. Well, Flint, Michigan might motivate some students just who are more curious about the social studies aspect, but now that it's hit our town, some of the lead in the water, it's gotten them really concerned. Like, no, what does this mean, and why is lead bad? Like, my pencil has lead. Is that what they mean? Like, there's pencil shavings in there. So as much local as you can make it, you increase the chance. There's no phenomenon that's going to get all kids probably equally curious and as curious as you want, but we're trying to make a diverse amount of topics that's going to hook them in at least during some point.
Yeah, increases the relevance to them,
Yeah.
like the personal relevance.
Mhm. So after this, they're going to do a fish, basically one of those decision matrix. And I give them a video, and this is one they can do here. And I think I've limited it down to like 4 different choices, like a biological, a chemical, a catching, or shocking. And which way should they go? Like, what should they do about this Asian carp? And they kind of do a little video here. And from this, then, especially for the e-learning, typically in class, I'll do this as a paper activity, like a CER type of piece. Years past, I've done like a letter to the editor, like who's the voice that we need to talk to that could impact the change that you want. Um, for me on this distance learning, I'm doing a lot more flip grids. And the reason I
Hmm.
love flip grids is these kids are living in an isolated world, it seems like, for the most part. And I want them to still have that chance to see their peers and have a chance to talk to their peers. And even if it's not synchronous, like we're in a Zoom all together, at least Flipgrid is a safe way where I can see all the conversations, but they can see the friends and maybe have comments that they just make sure they know that they're worrying about the SEL stuff too. So
Yeah.
making sure we're taking care of the whole child. So so for me, a lot of mine where if we look at electricity, we'll look at are wind farms better than solar power? That might be our STEM unit. When we start talking about heat, I'll have my students build themselves a lunchbox. And another advice for STEM and STEAM is there's a term in when you do computer programming called eating your own dog food. And basically, like if you're designing something, are you actually experiencing it yourself? Are you experiencing it as a user? So an example of this is like when I'm working with my education majors, here's this lab that you wrote. I want you to actually do the lab according to the directions that you have here. Or have a friend of yours do the lab and you watch them do the lab. And what you might assume, they may not assume, and the struggles that you can see, like, boy, I thought cutting out these fish might take me 5 minutes. It took me 30 minutes. I need to redesign it. So, like, when they build and prototype their lunchbox, And we want to get that version of like, you need to do it in iterations and have not just you don't fall in love with your first draft, you don't fall
Hmm.
in love with your first build. So after you make your lunchbox that you're going to uh, use it one day. Find out what you didn't like about it. Like actually get out there and test it. And we talk about like this one may not it's going to be built to last because we know this is going to be version one, but like boy, that handle didn't feel comfortable, or boy, the door kept on falling open, or I had it hinged at the top instead of at the bottom, so just everything dumped right out. And it's interesting to see what they might have assumed was a good design, and if they just tested it in class, would be a fine design, compared to actually using it, which causes all kinds of issues. And even if they're not going to put food in there, let's say they're doing something where they put a paint in there, which might make it unsafe. Like, okay, no, carry around an ice bag. Put a couple ice cubes in a bag, put it in your lunchbox, carry it around all day, and see what happened to it. Did it leak out? Did it have other problems? Um, a lot of times with our prototyping, we want it quick and fast so they can at least get their ideas. But there's also something about when we say just redo it and reevaluate it, for the kids to have that buy-in where like, no, this really didn't work. They'll be more apt to do revisions if they've seen the problems firsthand.
Yeah, and I think it's important to, so many times when we talk about iterative design, we talk about going through that process at least twice.
Mhm.
But when you think about it, sometimes that first phase is just to get a prototype to see if the concept will even work. That might not be a testable prototype.
Yeah.
You might have to rework it again to get a more usable prototype that would really narrow in on some of those criteria that are important, and then evaluate that one. So if time allows, I think the more times you can go through this iterative process and looking at different aspects of your design, the stronger that learning experience can be as well.
I think what I like about NIU's your design cycle for that is how much you have as collaboration as the heart of all of it. Because I see, especially with like language arts and writing, where kids think I need to go in a room, close the door, start my paper, and then turn it in. Compared to if we think about teaching, compared to cooking, compared to any task that we do, being social animals for the most part, maybe not during the pandemic, but where we're relying upon other people, like, here, taste this, how does this taste? Or, hey, I'm thinking about building this way, how does this work? How does this feel? And getting that feedback immediately and getting
Hmm.
that collaboration where the smartest person in the room is the room, just little bitty feedback things like, hey, have you thought about this? Not only getting the feedback from me, but getting it from their peers is so much more impactful, and also
Yeah.
so much more time wise.
Yeah, I remember back when I worked as a continuous improvement engineer, actually before that, um, I was in one of the testing labs, and so much of our time was spent kind of talking through and testing out ways to test things. And some of our ideas were so crazy, but you had to like bounce those ideas off of each other, try to prototype it to see if that test mechanism would even work, if it's even feasible to build before you can even test to see if you can use it. And it was so collaborative. We would spend time in the labs just with cardboard and sketching and kind of building out crazy ideas and going, nope, that didn't work, okay, what else can we do, all kind of focused on then, with key decision criteria that helped us understand why it worked and why it didn't.
The one after you've watched all of Kristen's podcasts, do that first. But after that is we as a family were watching The Imagineers on Disney Plus,
Yes.
and how much they reference about the collaboration that happens, and not just collaboration within their own team but across teams. And like a designer might talk to a painter or things, and it was like, man, how can I just get 5 episodes of this into my curriculum, or at least the greatest highlights of this. So
So so that probably poses the challenge in our current environment. If collaboration is kind of at the heart of all of this, and now you're in a remote learning environment, what are some of the things that you're doing to convert this to an online format or remote format and continue that collaboration?
it's difficult, and the bigger concern is how this snuck up on us. For me, at least with FERPA, and like getting the tools, making sure the tools are safe before we push them out. And now that we this year in our SIP plan, technology was removed. We had some other issues that we were looking at, and I feel like I'm looking at some of my neighboring school districts. I'm like, oh, They have so much better on the ball with us than us. So, which is it makes me excited to see like how much we can learn from others. The tool that I'm using a lot, well, actually quite a few. So in Google Docs, once I've shared that document with them, I share like basically a big slide deck, which is like a couple weeks worth of work. And for me, I can go into Google, which some people don't know this feature. It's actually neat to point out. If you go to Google and then your Google Drive, there's going to be some folder called Classroom. So anytime you put something in Classroom, it makes a folder for you. And then if you share a document and you say, create a document for each child, what it will do is it'll say like, first it'll say like seventh grade and whatever classes you have. And then the category that you have, like for me, it's like Asian carp. That might be a category in one folder. And then all the assignments are inside that folder. And since I made a copy for each kid, once I go into that folder, I have all my kids' documents in that one folder that I can access. So instead of using Google Classroom where I go in and have them turn and click and load, I just use that folder view and I can go in there pretty quickly and look at feedback and give them feedback early myself, just like where they're at. It's not as good as the peers, and I've got some other programs for the peer piece in it. But for me, at least, that's one way to start. Um, I also use like text expander and some other text shortcuts because you'll find when you start looking at a lot of projects, there's a lot of good, meaningful feedback that you're repetitive in for a lot of students, especially if there's very open-ended feedback, like, have you thought about how you're going to address this problem? And more open-ended. I can use some of those feedback for multiple reasons, or multiple students. For student to student feedback, I do a lot of like early on doing something called Flipgrid. And with Flipgrid, it's just basically a short little video. And with the video here, I'm going to quit sharing my screen here too. So instead of, and am I off that now? Oh, stop share. There we go.
There
Okay.
you go.
So instead of just with Flipgrid, instead of just having themselves getting videotaped, I love using Flipgrid with the phone. And what I tell the students is, don't worry about like videotaping yourself. I know what you look like. You're fabulous. You're wonderful. That's great. But instead, use the camera the other way. And whatever you're doing and creating, do this and tell me what you're doing. Because I want to see you explain it. I want to see it through your eyes. Like, I'm doing this and I'm pointing here and filming it this way. Little issue though, sometimes you might get issues where if they have their hands on it, they're covering up the microphone. So sometimes actually earbuds work better because then they're getting that microphone there. So that's just one thing.
Have you seen that Flipgrid now has a screencast
I have
tool?
not. No.
Yes, so the students can screencast while they record, which I think is going to be interesting as well.
Yeah. A new one that I'm playing with is something called Floop. Floop. It was on Cult of Pedagogy's one to watch this year. They are very strict on the FERPA rules, which is fantastic. I'm trying with my 8th graders, and basically if you're uploading a sketch or a model, it allows me to like click and drag, like almost like a smartboard, like little bubbles on top of things for feedback as well. My other favorite thing to get feedback with is something called Peer Grade. And Peer Grade's it's a freemium type version, but the free version gives all that I need. And for it, with a student does an assignment, and before they turn it into me, they turn it into Peer Grade, and I set up my classes and do all the back stuff. And from it, then Peer Grade will take all the assignments, and then it'll scatter it out, and then everyone gets 3 to review. And with those 3 documents, what will happen is the name's taken off, and they just have a rubric to kind of score them. So then the person sits down and they give the feedback, and there's a lot of prompts for the grader. And then they kind of give it an early grade and like what to watch. But one of the more powerful parts is then the person gets their paper back reviewed by 3 people. It doesn't even have to be a paper. It can be a picture, it can be a model, whatever they want to submit. But I get to grade the quality of feedback that was given to me and how meaningful it is. So some students who might be really positive and meaning well by saying, good job, well done, it's not really good growth feedback, right? It's warm fuzzies. So the kids then, they score the scores on how well they've done. And then for me, I can look at and say who's got the highest scores, and maybe we're looking like, wow, Parker, you got a really high score on this. Tell me what kind of feedback you gave, what made it meaningful for you? And we can have discussions of that. All these have tools which can be asynchronous as well. So my students are being seventh, eighth grade. Sometimes they're taking care of the house a little bit, or they're watching little brothers and sisters while mom and dad's at work. So I like making sure my students have the flexibility to work around their time frame as well. So there are ways where we can still make sure they're hearing from each other and they're spending the time for revision. I actually think it's a little bit more. I feel it's a better quality right now, surprisingly, of this e-learning, because I feel like they have so much time in their hands. Like revisions happening a lot, and for most of my kids, it's not just to hurry up and get done.
Hmm.
And especially like, oh, I get to see someone else's work and I get to talk to them, and they almost thrive for that social connection there. So it's a cookie like I didn't have to give them. It's already designed in the system.
Well, that's fantastic. These are some great ideas. Any kind of last tips that you could provide to other teachers out there on ways to keep this going in and out of the classroom?
For probably the biggest thing I've been advocating for teachers is just to keep their own sanity. Uh, Having a good work schedule, making sure, like, if I tried to answer every kid's email as soon as it came in during the day, I could spend a lot more time on that than taking care of myself, taking care of my family, doing my other parts of my job. So I open up feedback windows and I say, from 12 to 1, I'm here for Zoom. And from 1 to 3, I'm going to answer emails all that time. And in the morning, I'm going to probably like give messages. I'm going to like do the grading part. I'll do the planning part, but I don't live in email. I have my phone turned off. I have my email closed, and I can get work done. So for me, setting my own limits, I also feel like I'm not getting that fatigue of just always having to click for my email and just saving my own sanity. Um,
I
we talk about
understand
taking
that
care of
one.
the kids, but I want to make sure we take care of us too. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's a learning time for us as well, and definitely finding the iterative process of what works and what doesn't.
that is right. And because we do have these like little mini week sessions, like, okay, what worked this and that last week? What can I change for this next week coming up here? Because we are supposed to go back to school May 1st, according to the last I heard from our leadership. So we'll see. Maybe it might be a little bit longer. Who sees what's going to happen? So
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for joining us and talking a little bit about some of the things you do in your class and ways you help those students be STEAM thinkers. And thanks for joining us.
thank you. Good night.
Good night.